Dr. Robert Vance sat in the darkest corner of his study, staring out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city lights flickering below. At 45 years old, he had everything a person could possibly want on paper. He was the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Jude's Hospital, one of the most respected medical institutions in the state. He drove a luxury car, lived in a sprawling 6-bedroom estate that sat on 2 acres of land, and had a bank account that grew faster than he could spend it. Yet, as he took a sip of his scotch, the silence in the house was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that reminded him every single night that he was entirely alone. His wife, Alina, had passed away 5 years ago. They had tried for years to have children of their own, but it never happened. After the funeral, Robert had thrown himself into his work. If he was in the operating room, stitching hearts back together, he didn't have to think about his own broken heart. He became a machine. He woke up at 4 in the morning, ran 5 miles, drank black coffee, and spent 12 to 14 hours cutting into people's chests to save their lives. He was brilliant at it. His colleagues called him the Rock, a man who never flinched and never felt fatigue. But inside, Robert was just tired. He was tired of coming home to a dark house. He was tired of eating microwave dinners on a marble countertop that could seat 20 people. One rainy Tuesday, Robert found himself sitting in the waiting room of the Department of Child Services. It wasn't a place he ever expected to be. He wasn't even sure why he had filled out the application form 3 months ago. Maybe it was the ghost of Alina whispering in his ear, or maybe it was just the desperate need to fill the void in his chest. The social worker, a kind-looking woman with gray hair and reading glasses hanging around her neck, called his name. He followed her into a small, cluttered office. "Dr. Vance," she began, shuffling through a stack of thick files. "I've reviewed your application. Your background check is spotless. Your home is beautiful, perhaps too big for one person. You have the financial means and the stability we look for. But," she hesitated, looking up over her glasses. "But what?" Robert asked, leaning forward. He was used to delivering difficult news to patients, but he wasn't used to receiving it. "We usually place children 1 or 2 at a time," she explained softly. "It helps them adjust. But right now, we have an emergency situation. A sibling group. 5 boys. They were removed from their home last night due to severe neglect and abuse. The system is overflowing, Dr. Vance. We have nowhere to put them. If we split them up, it will destroy them." 5 boys. "Yes," she said, sliding a photo across the desk. "Their mother is in no state to care for them, and their father is absent. They are currently sleeping in the intake room because the emergency shelters are full. The oldest is 12. The youngest is just 2. Robert looked at the photo. It was black and white, grainy, taken quickly. He saw 5 faces huddled together. They looked dirty, tired, and scared. Their eyes were wide, full of a distrust that children should never have to feel. He saw a protective arm around the smallest one. He saw defiance in the eyes of the oldest. He didn't see a burden. He saw a unit. He saw a family that was fighting to stay together. "I'll take them," Robert said. The words came out of his mouth before his brain could process them. The social worker looked shocked. "Dr. Vance, please think about this. 5 boys. They are likely traumatized. They have behavioral issues. It's not just fostering. It's parenting on the hardest difficulty setting. Most foster parents quit after a week with siblings this large." "I have a big house," Robert said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I have 5 empty bedrooms. And I know how to fix things that are broken. At least I hope I do." 2 hours later, Robert was driving his large SUV through the pouring rain toward the group home. He stopped at a superstore on the way. He felt foolish, standing in the aisle, staring at rows of toothbrushes and blankets. He had no idea what 5 boys needed. He threw 5 toothbrushes into the cart blue, red, green, yellow, and orange. He added packs of underwear in sizes ranging from small to extra large. He bought peanut butter, jelly, bread, and gallons of milk. He bought a basketball. He bought a teddy bear, thinking of the 2-year-old. The cart was overflowing by the time he reached the checkout. The cashier looked at him, A single black man in a suit buying a mountain of children's items, and raised an eyebrow, but she didn't say a word. When he arrived at the facility, the smell hit him first. It was a mixture of bleach, stale urine, and old soup. The building was old and crumbling, with flickering, fluorescent lights. A guard led him down a long hallway to a large rec room. There, sitting on plastic chairs against the wall, were the 5 boys. They looked exactly like the photo, but worse in person. The oldest boy, who he learned was named Leo, sat on the end. He had a bruise on his cheek, and his arms were crossed tightly over his chest. Next to him were the twins, Sam and Seth, who were 8 years old. They were identical, gripping each other's hands so hard their knuckles were white. Then came 6-year-old Toby, who was rocking back and forth, staring at the floor. And on his lap, sleeping with his head tucked into Toby's neck, was baby Noah. Robert stood in the doorway for a moment. He felt out of place. He was a man who commanded respect in the operating room, but here he felt like an intruder. He knelt down, so he wasn't towering over them. "Hi, everyone," he said softly. "I'm Robert." Leo looked up. His eyes were full of fire. "Are you the cop?" "No," Robert said, shaking his head. "I'm not a cop. I'm here to take you home." "Which home?" Leo spat out. "The next foster place where they hid us. Or the one where they lock us in the basement." Robert's heart tightened. He knew about statistics. He knew these kids had been through the ringer. He looked Leo in the eye. "Neither. It's my home. And nobody is going to hit you there. And nobody is going to lock you in a basement. You have my word." Leo stared at him for a long time, trying to find a lie in Robert's face. He didn't find one. He nodded slowly, a tiny crack in his armor. "Okay, but Noah needs milk. He hasn't eaten since breakfast." Robert smiled, a genuine smile that he hadn't felt in years. "I have milk. I have whole milk, chocolate milk, and juice. And I have a car big enough for all of you. Let's get out of here." The process of leaving was chaotic. The staff gave Robert trash bags filled with the boys' meager belongings, mostly torn clothes and a few broken toys. Robert took the bags gently. He helped Noah, who had woken up and was crying, into his car seat. He guided the twins to the middle seats. He sat in the back with Leo and Toby so they wouldn't feel isolated as they pulled away from the gray building and drove toward the wealthy suburbs. The car was silent. The boys were mesmerized by the rain on the windows and the soft leather seats. They had never been in a car this nice. They had never seen houses this big. When Robert pulled into the driveway, the automatic lights flooded the exterior. The house was massive. It looked like a castle to them. "Is this a hotel?" Sam asked, whispering to his brother. "No," Robert said, opening the car door. "This is home. Come on in. We have to get you guys cleaned up and fed." He led them inside. The foyer was grand, with a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. The boys stood on the marble floor, hesitant to step further, afraid they would dirty the house with their muddy shoes. Robert noticed this immediately. He didn't care about the floor. "Shoes off," he said, kicking off his own loafers. "The rule in this house is socks. That way, we can slide on the floor." He showed them to the kitchen. It was huge, with 2 refrigerators and an island that could have served as a surgical table. Robert opened the fridge and started pulling out food. He made them sandwiches, thick with ham and cheese. He poured tall glasses of milk for the little ones and juice for the older ones. For the first 20 minutes, nobody spoke. They ate like they were starving, inhaling the food in seconds. Robert just watched, leaning against the counter. He didn't know how to be a father, but he knew how to care. He saw the tension slowly leaving their shoulders. After they ate, Robert showed them their rooms. He had spent the morning rushing to put sheets on the beds. Each room had a new toothbrush on the pillow and a fresh set of pajamas. "This one is yours, Leo," Robert said, opening the door to the room next to the master bedroom. It had a desk and a view of the garden. "You're the oldest, so you get the privacy. But you need to keep your door open if your brothers need you." Leo walked in and touched the clean quilt. He turned to Robert, and for the first time, the anger was gone, replaced by a look of pure exhaustion. "Thanks," he mumbled. Robert moved to the twins' room, then Toby's. And finally, the nursery he had hastily set up for Noah. He put Noah in the crib, and the toddler grabbed his finger before falling back asleep instantly. Walking back downstairs, Robert found Leo standing in the middle of the living room. The other boys were sitting on the rug, looking around in awe. "Ah! What happens now?" Leo asked. He was still guarding his brothers, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Robert walked over and sat on the sofa, sinking into the cushions. He looked at the 5 frightened, dirty, beautiful boys who had just invaded his perfect, empty life. "Now," Robert said, "we go to sleep. And tomorrow, we figure it out. I don't know much about being a dad, Leo. I might mess up. But I promise you this. You are safe here. All of you. Nobody is taking you away from each other. You stay together." Leo looked at his brothers, then back at Robert. He nodded once. "Okay, we'll stay." That night, Robert didn't sit in his study drinking scotch. He sat in the living room with the lights off, listening to the sounds of the house. He heard the creak of floorboards as Leo checked on his brothers. He heard the twins giggling softly in their room. He heard the house breathing, alive for the first time in 5 years. He realized, as he sat there in the dark, that he wasn't the one who had rescued them. They were the ones who had just rescued him. Asterisk, the first 2 weeks were nothing short of a nightmare. The silence that Dr. Robert Vance had grown used to was shattered, placed by a chaotic, noisy storm that he had no idea how to manage. The boys, having lived in survival mode for so long, didn't know how to function in a normal home. They were used to fighting for scraps, fighting for attention, and fighting for safety. Now, in this big, beautiful house, those instincts didn't just turn off. The kitchen became the first battleground. Robert had stocked the refrigerator with fresh fruits, vegetables, and juices. He came home from a short shift at the hospital to find the twins, Sam and Seth, sitting on the floor of the pantry, stuffing their mouths with handfuls of dry cereal. They had eaten 3 boxes of it in an hour. When Robert gently tried to guide them to the table, Seth bit him. It wasn't a hard bite, but it was a warning. They didn't trust that the food would be there later. They had to eat it now while they had the chance. Then there was the issue of discipline. Leo, the 12-year-old, decided he was the man of the house, not Robert. One evening, Robert told Leo to turn off the television and get ready for bed. Leo stood up, his chest puffed out, and looked Robert dead in the eye. "You aren't my dad," Leo said, his voice shaking but loud. "You're just the guy with the money. When are you sending us back? Just tell us now, so we can be ready." Robert saw the fear behind the anger. Leo wasn't trying to be rude. He was trying to protect his heart. He was waiting for the inevitable rejection. "I'm not sending you back," Robert said calmly, wiping his hands on a towel. "This is your house. But in this house, we have rules. And we respect each other. Now please turn off the TV." Leo didn't move. He stared at Robert with a mixture of hatred and hope. It was a standoff that lasted for 5 minutes. Eventually, Robert didn't yell. He just turned off the TV himself and walked away. He knew that if he fought fire with fire, he would burn the whole house down. The real trouble started when school began. Robert enrolled all 5 boys in the local public school. He bought them new backpacks, sneakers, and clothes. They looked like clean, polished students on the outside, but on the inside, they were terrified. It took exactly 3 days for the first fight. Leo came home with a split lip and torn shirt. The principal called Robert within minutes of them walking through the door. Apparently, a boy in Leo's class had made a comment about the twins looking dirty. Leo didn't just push the boy. He tackled him and punched him twice before a teacher pulled him off. Robert sat Leo down at the kitchen table. Looking at the ice pack pressed against his son's face, "We don't hit people, Leo," Robert said gently. "You have to use your words." "He said they were trash," Leo yelled, tears finally spilling out of his eyes. "He said they were going to end up in jail like their mom. I couldn't let him say that." Robert felt a sharp pain in his chest. He realized then that these boys carried a heavy weight. They were judged by where they came from, not who they were. He reached across the table and put his hand on Leo's shoulder. "I know it hurts," Robert said, "and I know you want to protect them. But you have to trust me to handle the big stuff. If you get expelled, you can't protect them at school. You have to be smart." That night, the house felt incredibly heavy. Robert was exhausted. He was trying to be a surgeon, a cook, a cleaner, and a father all at once, and he felt like he was failing at all of them. He stood in the hallway, listening to the sounds of the boys settling down. He heard Toby crying for his mother in the next room. He heard the twins arguing over a blanket. He walked into Toby's room and sat on the edge of the bed. Toby was 6 years old, but looked smaller, curled up in a ball. Robert didn't know what to say. He couldn't bring Toby's mother back. He couldn't fix the past. So he just did what he wished someone had done for him when he was scared and lonely. He reached out and started rubbing Toby's back in slow, rhythmic circles. "Hey, I'm here, Toby," Robert whispered into the dark. "I'm right here. You aren't alone." Toby's sobbing slowed down. He reached out and grabbed Robert's hand, holding it tight against his chest. "You promise you won't leave?" "I promise," Robert said. He stayed there for an hour until Toby's breathing became deep and steady. That small moment became a turning point. It wasn't a big magical change, but things started to shift. Robert realized he couldn't force this family to work with strict rules and schedules. He had to bend. He started coming home earlier from the hospital. He hired a housekeeper to help with the cleaning so he could focus on the boys. He stopped expecting them to be grateful and started just letting them be kids. One Saturday, Robert decided they needed to get out of the house. They were all climbing the walls. He packed them into the SUV and drove them to a park on the other side of town. It was a crisp autumn day, the air cool and fresh. At first, the boys just sat on a bench, unsure of what to do. They were used to being inside, locked away. Robert went to the trunk and pulled out a soccer ball he had bought weeks ago. He tossed it to Leo. "Go on," Robert said. "Show me what you got." Leo looked at the ball, then at his brothers. Slowly, he stood up. He dribbled the ball a few feet. Sam and Seth ran after him. Soon, little Noah was waddling in the grass, laughing as Robert chased him. He's pretending to be a monster. For the first time, Robert saw them laugh. Really laugh. He saw Sam, the quieter twin, score a goal and jump up and down, screaming with joy. He saw Leo, the hardened protector, tackle Robert to the ground with a huge grin on his face. The tension that had been living in their shoulders seemed to melt away, if only for an afternoon. They sat on the picnic blanket afterward, eating sandwiches that Robert had made. The mood was different. The wall between them had lowered a little. "Hey, Dad?" Leo asked. Robert froze. It was the first time any of them had called him that. He looked over at Leo. The boy was picking at the crust of his sandwich, trying to act casual. "Yeah," Robert asked, his voice slightly choked up. "Can we come back here tomorrow?" Leo asked. Robert smiled. "We can come back here every single weekend if you want." As the months went by, the rhythm of the house changed. The fighting became less about survival and more about normal brotherly squabbles. The twins stopped hiding food. Toby started sleeping through the night. They learned to trust that when Robert left for work in the morning, he would always come back. They learned that the food in the fridge would be replenished. They learned that love wasn't a transaction. It was a promise. Robert changed too. He stopped living like a bachelor. He learned how to cook mac and cheese in bulk. He learned how to braid hair for Noah, who had started letting his curls grow. He learned that his worth wasn't measured by his success in the operating room, but by the 5 pairs of eyes that lit up when he walked through the front door one evening. About 6 months after they arrived, there was a bad thunderstorm. The power went out. The house was pitch black. In the past, Robert would have been annoyed by the inconvenience. But that night, he heard the noise. He walked into the hallway with a flashlight. There was a lump of blankets in the middle of the corridor. He shone the light down and saw all 5 boys dragging their mattresses and pillows out of their rooms. They were making a giant nest in the hallway. "What's going on?" Robert asked, laughing. "The storm is scary," Leo said, sounding like the 12-year-old he actually was, rather than the adult he pretended to be. "We want to sleep together." Robert didn't tell them to go back to bed. He didn't say it was against the rules. Instead, he went to his room, dragged his own heavy comforter and pillow out, and threw it onto the pile. "Move over," Robert said. He squeezed into the middle of the pile of boys. He had an arm around Noah and an arm around Leo, with the twins' feet poking into his back. It was cramped and hot and uncomfortable. It was the best sleep Robert had in 5 years, lying there in the dark, listening to the rain pound against the roof and the breathing of his new family. Robert knew the adoption had to be made official. He had been fostering them, thinking that eventually the state might move them or find a relative. But there were no relatives. There was only him. The next morning, when the sun came up and the power flickered back on, Robert made a phone call. He called his lawyer. He didn't ask about the process. He just told him to start the paperwork. He wanted these boys. He wanted to lock this down in gold and ink. He wanted them to have his name. He wanted them to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were Vance's now. The adjustment period wasn't over. There would be more fights, more bad grades, more broken windows, and more tears. But the fear was gone. The uncertainty was gone. As Robert looked at the boys eating pancakes in the kitchen that morning, arguing over the syrup, he realized that he wasn't raising orphans to fit into his life. He was building his life around them. And for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. Time has a way of moving fast when you are busy living it. One day blurred into the next, and suddenly, the quiet panic of those first few months turned into a loud, bustling rhythm. The adoption papers were signed, sealed, and filed away in a drawer. But the real work was just beginning. Years seemed to fly by in a blur of school runs, basketball practices, and endless grocery shopping. Robert watched the transformation of his house with a sense of wonder. The pristine, museum-like rooms he once cherished were now covered in fingerprints, sports equipment, and the clutter of a large family. The expensive leather sofa in the living room had a juice stain on the cushion that refused to come out, a mark from when baby Noah was a toddler. Robert refused to replace it. Every time he looked at that stain, he smiled. It was proof that life was actually happening there. The boys grew like weeds. Leo, who once was the angry boy with the bruised face, shot up to 6 feet tall. He didn't get into fights anymore. Instead, he channeled all that energy into the school's wrestling team and the junior ROTC program. He became the man of the house in the way Robert had hoped, not by fighting, but by leading. He helped the twins with their homework when Robert was stuck at the hospital late. He made sure everyone looked presentable before school. He had become a protector in the truest sense. The twins, Sam and Seth, were teenagers now, and they were inseparable. While they looked exactly the same, their personalities couldn't be more different. Sam was the tinkerer. He spent his time taking apart old radios and toasters in the garage, trying to figure out how they worked. Seth was the talker. He could sell ice to a polar bear, charming everyone he met with a wide, easy grin. Both were brilliant students, applying to engineering colleges with full scholarships on the horizon. Toby, the sensitive 6-year-old who used to rock back and forth in the corner, was now a high school senior and a talented artist. The walls of Robert's office were covered in Toby's sketches, pencil drawings of cityscapes, animals, and portraits of the family. He was quiet and thoughtful, often observing things the others missed. And then there was Noah. Noah, the baby who Robert used to hold in the crook of his arm while he drank his morning coffee, was now a 16-year-old giant. He was the star of the high school basketball team, with a height and grace that made scouts from major universities start calling the house. Noah was the glue that held the brothers together. He had a way of making everyone laugh, a lightness about him that defied his difficult start in life. Robert changed too. The stress lines on his face had deepened, but his eyes were softer. He stopped trying to be the perfect surgeon who came home to an empty house. He learned to delegate at work so he could be home for dinner. He became the coach for Noah's basketball team when the regular coach quit. He learned how to bake birthday cakes crooked, lopsided cakes that the boys loved because he made them. Every Sunday night was sacred. No matter what was happening at the hospital or with school, everyone had to be at the dinner table. They would eat roast chicken or lasagna and talk about their week. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they laughed until their sides hurt. But they always showed up one Sunday evening, about 13 years after they had arrived with their trash bags. The atmosphere was different. It was a mix of excitement and nostalgia. The twins had just received their acceptance letters to university. Leo was preparing for the police academy. It was a time of transition. Robert stood at the head of the table looking at his sons. They were young men now. They had their own dreams, their own voices, and their own paths. He felt a pang of sadness, the famous empty nest syndrome that he had read about, but never understood until now. But mostly he felt pride. "I have an announcement," Robert said, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room went quiet. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Robert began, his voice steady, "about how far we've come. You boys have worked so hard. You've overcome things that would have broken most adults. You've made this house a home. And I know things are changing. You are all growing up and moving on to the next chapters of your lives." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I've decided to scale back my hours at the hospital. I'm not retiring, but I'm stepping down as chief of surgery. I want to be around more. I want to be there for your games, your graduations, and whatever comes next. I've done enough surgeries. I want to focus on being your dad." There was a moment of silence. Then Leo stood up. He was taller than Robert now. He walked around the table and wrapped his arms around his father. It was a tight bear hug that caught Robert off guard. "You've already been the best dad," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to quit your job for us, but we love you for it." One by one, the other boys got up to join in the hug. Even the twins, who were usually too cool for public displays of affection, piled on. Robert stood there, squeezed in the middle of his family, feeling a warmth that no medical degree could ever provide. He felt that he had achieved his life's purpose. He had taken 5 broken pieces and helped them become a masterpiece. Life seemed perfect. The struggles of the past, the fights, the distrust, the uncertainty felt like distant memories. They were a story they told sometimes, like "Remember when we burned the toast?" Or "Remember when Leo punched that kid?" They were just stories now. A few weeks later, the house was unusually quiet. It was a Tuesday evening. Robert had come home early to catch up on some reading. The twins were at a study group. Noah was at basketball practice, and Toby was in his room sketching. Leo was working a part-time shift at a local mechanic shop to save money for his police academy gear. Robert sat in his favorite armchair, a book open on his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was just enjoying the peace. He watched the sun go down through the window, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. He felt content. He felt safe. He thought about the future. He thought about walking across the stage to watch the twins get their diplomas. He thought about pinning the badge on Leo's chest. He thought about traveling, maybe taking the boys on a trip to see the ocean. He had saved up plenty of money over the years. The financial burden of raising 5 boys was heavy, but Robert had managed it well. He had invested wisely, and the large trust fund left by his wife had grown. He knew that college tuitions were covered. He knew that the house was paid off. He had prepared for everything, or so he thought. The silence in the house was suddenly broken by the sharp, shrill ring of the landline telephone in the kitchen. It was an old habit. They all had cell phones, but Robert kept the landline for emergencies and for those few people who refused to use modern technology. Robert sighed, marking his page and standing up. He walked into the kitchen, the hardwood floors cool under his socks. He didn't recognize the number on the caller ID. It was from an area code 3 states away, a place he didn't know anyone from. He picked up the receiver, leaning against the counter. "Hello, Dr. Vance?" A woman's voice came through the line. It was rushed, frantic, and sounded breathless. "Yes, this is he," Robert said, his tone shifting instantly to doctor mode. "Can I help you?" "Doctor, my name is Linda. I'm a head nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Oklahoma. I am calling about a patient here, a Jane Doe." She paused, the sound of hospital monitors beeping in the background. "She is in critical condition. She suffered a massive stroke about an hour ago." Robert frowned. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Why are you calling me? I don't work there." "Sir," the nurse lowered her voice, sounding desperate. The woman. She regained consciousness for a brief moment before we sedated her. She was incredibly agitated. She kept asking for her sons. She gave us your name. She said you have her boys. Robert's blood ran cold. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very heavy. He gripped the phone tighter. Who are you talking about? She said her name is Catherine, the nurse said. She said she gave up 5 boys 13 years ago. She said she's been looking for them for a long time. Robert felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Catherine. The name hit him like a physical blow. It was the name on the birth certificates. It was the name of the woman who had abandoned them. The woman who had left them in a dirty apartment with no food. The woman whose absence had caused Leo so much pain. She is dying, Dr. Vance, the nurse continued softly. The doctors don't think she will make it through the night. But she was insistent. She said there is something you need to know. Something about the boys. And about their father. Robert looked out the kitchen window into the backyard. He saw the old oak tree where the boys used to play. The perfect world he had imagined just seconds ago was crumbling. I'm listening, Robert whispered, his voice barely audible. She said he found her, the nurse said, and that he's coming for them. The kitchen suddenly felt very cold. Robert gripped the phone until his knuckles turned white. The silence on the other end of the line screaming louder than any noise he had ever heard. The warm, safe bubble he had built for his family over the last 13 years had just been pierced by a needle from the past. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Robert asked, his voice steady, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The patient, the nurse, Linda said, her voice trembling slightly. Her name is Catherine. Before she lost consciousness again, she was terrified. She kept saying, he found me. She said a man was released from prison last week. She believes he is coming for the boys. She gave me your name because she said you took them. She said, you are the only one who can keep them safe. Robert closed his eyes. He remembered the file on the boys. He remembered the brief, messy notes from the social worker 13 years ago. The father had been a ghost, violent shadow mentioned in hushed tones, abusive, dangerous, a career criminal who had disappeared from their lives long before Abort entered them. Robert had assumed the man was dead or gone forever. He had built a fortress around his family, but he hadn't checked the locks on the gates of the past. Is she? Is she going to make it? Robert asked, though he knew the answer before he asked. No, Linda said softly. It's only a matter of time. The damage was too severe. But she is adamant that you know. She said she has something for you. Wait for them. A letter. Robert felt a headache blooming behind his eyes. I'll come, he said. I have to. It's a 3-hour flight, doctor, she warned. I'll be on the next plane, Robert said. He hung up the phone and stood there in the dark kitchen for a long moment. He looked at the fridge, covered in photos of Noah making a silly face, Toby holding an art trophy, and Leo in his ROTC uniform. These were his sons. He had fought for them, cried for them, and loved them. No ghost from the past was going to take that away. He walked to the bottom of the stairs. Boys, he called out. Everyone down here, please? Within a minute, the house was alive with movement. Toby came down first, pencil still behind his ear. The twins tumbled down the stairs, arguing about a video game. Noah followed, wiping sweat from his face after shooting hoops in the driveway. Leo came in last, still wearing his grease-stained mechanic's shirt. They gathered in the living room. Sensing the shift in their father's mood, Robert wasn't one to panic. If he called a family meeting like this, it was serious. What's going on, Dad? Leo asked, his eyes narrowing. Is everything okay? Robert sat on the coffee table so he was eye level with them. He looked at their faces he loved more than his own life. He had to be careful. He couldn't scare them, but he couldn't lie. I just received a phone call, Robert began slowly. It was from a hospital in Oklahoma. A woman there. Your biological mother, Catherine. She is very sick. The room went dead silent. Toby's eyes went wide. Noah stopped bouncing his leg. The twins looked at each other, then back at Robert. They didn't talk about her much. She was a mystery, a void in their history. She's dying, Noah asked quietly. Yes, Robert said. She is. But before she got sick, she passed on a message to the nurses. She was worried about you. She told us that your biological father was released from prison recently, and she believes he might be looking for you. A collective intake of breath filled the room. It wasn't the reaction of fear Robert expected, but a look of cold realization. They knew who he was, even if they didn't remember him. They had grown up with the stories whispered in the foster system before they came to Robert. The monster. The reason their mother ran, Leo stood up straighter, his fists clenching at his sides. He's out? Yes, Robert said. We don't know for sure if he knows where you are, or if he is even coming, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I am going to fly there tonight to see if there is anything more we need to know. I need you boys to stay here. Lock the doors. Stick together. Robert expected them to be scared. He expected them to beg him not to go or to ask to sleep in his bed like they did when they were little. But they were men now, Dad Leo said, stepping forward. You can't go alone. What if he shows up here while you're gone? Robert looked at his oldest son. He saw the man Leo had become. I have to go, Leo. I need to get answers. I need to make sure we are safe. I'll call the local police here and ask them to do a drive by the house while I'm gone. But I need you to be the man of the house until I get back. Leo nodded, his jaw set. We'll be ready. I have my bat. And we know the alarm code. I'm not leaving, Robert said firmly. I'm coming back. Always. Robert packed a small bag in record time. He called the police, explaining the situation, and they promised to have a patrol car cruise the neighborhood periodically. He hated leaving them, but he needed to face this head-on. He needed to see Catherine. He needed to look the past in the eye and make sure it stayed buried. The flight was long and restless. Robert stared out the window at the clouds, his mind racing with plans. How could he protect them? Should they move? Should he get a lawyer? The surgeon in him wanted to cut the problem out, to remove the tumor that threatened his family. But this wasn't surgery. This was life. It was messy and unpredictable. He landed in Oklahoma late at night and took a taxi straight to the hospital. It was a stark contrast to the gleaming medical center where he worked. This place was old, the linoleum yellowed, the air smelling of antiseptic and despair. He found the ICU unit and introduced himself to the nurse named Linda at the desk. Dr. Vance, she said, looking relieved. Thank you for coming. She's barely hanging on, but she kept waking up asking for the letter. She wrote it a while ago, she told me. She's been keeping it for years. Linda handed him a crumpled envelope. It was stained and wrinkled, as if it had been carried in a pocket for a long time. On the front, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "For my boys." Robert took the envelope. It felt heavy in his hand. Can I see her? She's unconscious, Linda said gently. But you can sit with her. Robert walked into the small, dim room. There was a woman in the bed, hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically. She looked frail, her face sunken, her skin pale. It was hard to imagine this woman giving birth to 5 strong, vibrant boys. Robert pulled a chair up and sat down. He watched her breathe. He felt a strange mix of anger and pity. Anger that she had let those boys suffer, pity that her life had ended this way alone in a hospital room. He didn't wake her. He didn't try to say goodbye. They were strangers. The connection between them was purely biological. The real connection was the blood pumping through the veins of his sons. He opened the envelope. The letter was short, written on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was messy, filled with crossings out and teardrops. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry. I am so sorry for everything. I wasn't strong enough. I tried to be a mother, but I was broken. When you were little, I did something right. I ran. I ran away from him because he was going to hurt you. He is a monster. He never wanted children. He wanted property. I took you to the shelter because it was the only way he wouldn't find you. I gave you up to save you. Asterisk, Robert paused, taking a shaky breath. He looked at the woman in the bed. She hadn't abandoned them out of hate. She had abandoned them out of fear. It was a terrible, tragic choice, but it was made of desperation. Asterisk, I know he is out of prison. I found out last week. I know he will come looking for what he thinks he owns. But I have a secret. I never told him who took you. But I also know you are with a good man. I watched from a distance once, just to see. I saw you at the park. I saw you smiling. I saw the way he looked at you. I knew you were safe. I have a small life insurance policy. It's not much, but I named you, the doctor, as the beneficiary. Use it for them. Make sure they go to college. Make sure they become the men I couldn't raise. Asterisk, asterisk, please. Don't let him take them. Asterisk. Robert folded the letter and put it in his pocket. He sat there for another hour, just listening to the hum of the machines. He realized then that he wasn't just a father to these boys by choice. He was their father by destiny. The universe had conspired to put them in his path, and he wasn't going to let that be in vain. He stood up to leave. He had one more stop to make before he flew home. He needed to see a detective. He needed to make sure that if this man, this father of theirs, was coming, he would have to go through Robert Vance first. As he walked out of the hospital into the cool morning air, Robert pulled out his phone. He dialed the house. Leo picked up on the first ring. Dad. Leo's voice was anxious. We're okay, Leo, Robert said, his voice strong. I'm coming home. Everything is going to be fine. I love you all. We love you too, Dad, Leo replied. Hurry back. Robert hung up and hailed a taxi. He wasn't just a surgeon anymore. He was a father, and nobody was going to hurt his family. The flight back felt like the longest journey of Robert's life. He sat with the letter tucked safely in his jacket pocket right over his heart. He didn't sleep. He spent the whole time watching the clouds, turning the situation over in his mind. He knew the biological father was a threat, but he also knew he wasn't powerless. He had resources, he had brains, and most importantly, he had a team of 5 sons who were fighters. He had spent the morning at a police station in Oklahoma, giving a statement and providing the name of the man. The police there had assured him they would be watching, but Robert knew he had to secure his own home. When his taxi pulled into the driveway, the front door flew open before he even reached the steps. Leo was there with the rest of the brothers right behind him. They looked tired, but they stood together like a wall. The sight of them made Robert's chest ache with relief. He didn't say a word as he walked up the path. He just dropped his bag and pulled them all into a hug. It was a clumsy, crushing embrace, but it was exactly what he needed. They went inside and locked the door. Robert poured himself a cup of coffee and led the boys to the living room. The house was quiet, the ticking of the grandfather clock the only sound. Robert looked at them as sons. They weren't scared little kids anymore. They were waiting for him to lead them. I spoke to the police, Robert said, his voice calm. And I spoke to your mother before I left. Is she gone? Noah asked softly. Yes, Robert said gently. She passed away peacefully. The boys nodded. It was a sad moment, but it wasn't a tragedy. It was the closing of a door they had left open a long time ago. She left us something, Robert continued. Not just money. The truth. She ran away from your father because he was dangerous. She gave you up to the system to hide you from him. She wasn't perfect, and she made mistakes, but in the end, she tried to save you. Leo sat forward, his elbows on his knees. So, he is coming for us? Robert hesitated. He didn't want to lie to them. He might try. But here's the thing about the past. It only has as much power as you give it. This man thinks he owns you because of biology. But he doesn't know you. He doesn't know that we are a family. Just then, Robert's phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from a number he didn't recognize. Robert picked it up and read it aloud. Asterisk, I know where they are. You can't keep what's mine. Asterisk, the room went cold. The twins scooted closer to each other. Toby grabbed the arm of the sofa, but Leo didn't flinch. He just looked at the phone, then at his dad. He's close, Leo said. No, Robert said firmly. He's trying to scare us. But I called in some help while I was at the airport. Robert stood up and walked to the window. Through the curtains, he saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser parked at the end of the driveway. Then another car pulled up. It was unmarked, and a man in a trench coat stepped out. It was Detective Harris, an old friend of Robert's from the hospital, who had worked security there for years. Robert opened the front door. Detective Harris walked in, shaking Robert's hand. "We got him," Harris said quietly, but loud enough for the boys to hear. He was at the bus station asking questions about a black surgeon with 5 boys. "We picked him up for questioning. He had a weapon on him, Robert. He's not going anywhere for a long time." Robert let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 13 years. He turned back to the boys. "Did you hear that? It's over. The police have him." Leo stood up. For the first time, Robert saw his son's shoulders fully drop. The weight he had been carrying since he was a little boy, the weight of protecting his brothers, finally lifted. "He can't hurt us?" Leo asked. "He can't touch you," Robert said. "I promise you that." The next few weeks were a blur of relief and normalcy. The threat of their biological father vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The legal system took over, and the man was sent back to prison for violating parole and weapons charges. It turned out that the insurance money Catherine left behind was significant. It was more than enough to cover college for all 5 boys, something that had been weighing on Robert's mind as retirement approached. But the real change wasn't the money or the safety. It was the bond between them. One evening, about a month later, Robert was in the backyard. He was trying to fix the old grill, grease on his hands, sweat on his forehead. He wasn't a surgeon in that moment. He was just a dad trying to cook dinner. Leo came out, carrying 2 sodas. He handed one to Robert. "Thanks," Robert said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I was thinking," Leo said, leaning against the railing, "about that letter." "About her saying she ran to save us?" "Yeah. She did the right thing," Leo said, taking a sip of his drink. "If she hadn't run, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have you." Robert looked at his son. He saw so much of himself in Leo, stubborn, loyal, and deeply caring. "She gave you life, Leo, but you guys gave me a life. I think we're even." The back door opened, and the twins tumbled out, followed by Toby and Noah. They were laughing, carrying plates and burgers. "Hurry up," Noah yelled. "We're starving." Robert looked at the grill, then at the sea of faces waiting for food. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the backyard. It was a perfect moment. There were no ghosts, no fears, no shadows. Just the sound of laughter and the smell of charcoal. He flipped a burger and smiled. All right. Keep your shirts on. Dinner's ready." They sat around the patio table, passing food, arguing over who got the last corn on the cob. Robert sat back watching them. He thought about the empty house he used to live in. He thought about the silence that used to drive him crazy. He would never be lonely again. The story of their life wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, painful, and complicated. They had come from nothing, from trauma and loss. But they had built something real. They had built a fortress of love that no outsider could ever tear down. A stranger had tried to take them back to the darkness, but they had chosen the light. Robert took a bite of his burger. It was a little burnt. It was perfect. He looked at Leo, who was currently trying to steal a French fry off Toby's plate. He looked at the twins, plotting something mischievous. He looked at Noah, who was telling a loud story about basketball. "Hey, Dad?" Leo asked, catching his eye across the table. "Yeah, son." "Pass the ketchup." Robert laughed and passed the bottle. It was a simple request, a normal moment in a normal life. And that was the greatest victory of all. They were just a family, and they were going to be just fine.